Hi, this is Walter from Yellowstone Country Fly Fishing, and this is my Montana Guide Flies video for March 9th, 2025. And what I'm tying here is a jig girdle bug, or Pat's Rubberlegs, or just Rubberlegs, or Turd, or whatever you want to call it. And Pat's Rubberlegs probably being the most common name now, but I've always called them girdle bugs because I've been using them since I was 10 for panfish in 1990. And we always called them Rubberlegs, and so, or girdle bugs, and so either Rubberlegs or girdle bugs is what I call them. But anyhow, this is obviously the most popular kind of big junk nymph in the West these days, and this is the one that I typically am using this time of year. This is tied with Cascade Crest Tools Henry's Lake Chenille, and you can see it's kind of brown and tan with that copper sparkle in it. And I'll tie these either with a black bead or a copper bead, very occasionally a orange or pink bead to suggest eggs. And typically use this one in the spring and the fall, but mostly in the spring when we've got a little bit of snowmelt starting to come down, kind of give the river that kind of glacial tint. And it's got this sort of sparkle to it. So in contrast to just a kind of a tan and black one, which this is pretty close to, it's got a little bit more presence. And obviously this is not a very complicated fly to tie, and so kind of the thrust of this video is going to be kind of the whys and the wherefores of the changes I'm making to the basic pattern, just to make it stand out a little bit better. A lot of my flies are standard patterns that I just tie slightly differently, whether that's sparkly chenille and different color legs here on a different kind of hook, versus my dry flies that I tie as a cripple. Just these small kind of tweaks to standard patterns are often very effective. And so I'm going to kind of talk about why I'm making the tweaks I'm making as I tie it. Okay, so the hook I've got in a vise here is an odd one. This is an Eagle Claw number 630, which you can kind of just see right here in the corner, and size 6. And these are a 3XL 90-degree jig hook. And I think they're actually designed for like tying spinner baits or something like that, because you definitely are not going to find this in a fly shop. You need to buy this from Cabela's or online or something. And this is the smallest hook size that they make this in. You can get them all the way up to like 3/0, I think. I actually tie a lot of bass and pike flies on these. The downside of this hook, two things. Number one, it's got this York bend, so getting the bead on there is kind of a pain sometimes. And then number two, they're very, very dull, so you'll need to sharpen these before you actually fish them. And then I've got a 3/16 inch black nickel brass bead on here. Like I said, I use copper or occasionally a bead or an egg color. So I've slid that on already, and then I'm actually going to start my thread, which, match whatever color chenille you're using, but on this one I'm using 6/0 light brown. And I'm going to start that slightly back from from that 90-degree turn there. And now the reason I'm using the 90-degree bead, or the 90-degree jig hook here, couple things. Number one, it's a lot easier to tie in antennae on your fly, which is what I'm going to do first here, versus on a standard jig hook. And then I'm going to show you here a standard jig hook. This is a 2XL. They're all about the same. A lot of companies make this kind of hook, but this is about what I would need to get the same shank length here. And you notice how much bigger that gap on that hook is. That's going to rip up little fish. If you have a 6 or 8 inch fish that decides it wants to try to eat this thing, on a size 6 stonefly nymph, it's going to tear him apart. Odds are that's going to take his eye out or brain him or gill him. And just having this really wide gape is more prone to gilling fish anyway. If I do actually use these hooks for this pattern, but I'll tie it as a get down pats, which is essentially just an extended body where you wrap the chenille over the legs. And so I'll tie that in, the same length of a fly, but on like a size 10 hook. And that way, I reduce that gape size. But if I'm just trying a straight, run-of-the-mill girdle bug, I want this longer shank hook with a slightly smaller gape, because it's still plenty big. I mean, you saw on that hook, those fish are going to have no trouble eating that. But it's not going to brain those little fish. And so it's just, if you're catching and releasing a fish that you took his eye out, that's not very effective. But the legs here, I almost always use a barred leg on my stonefly patterns. Just increase that kind of variation and sense of movement, sense of life. And this is a copper brown barred centipede leg, or sexy floss, I should say, which is a Montana Fly Company product, but they they sell, you can get these from anybody. And what I like to do on the antennae and the tails is just pinch them like that and then tie in on the pinch. And I managed to drop it. And one thing I'm being careful of here is trying to keep that well back from that eye, because I don't want to go over that. And I'm actually going to wrap pretty far down into that body there. If you're using a smaller bead than I'm using here, which you're going to struggle to get it around the hook bend there, but if you are using a smaller bead, you may want to make that tie-in point much smaller. And then I always make a few turns in front of those legs to keep them from kind of buckling around into the bend of that hook, though. So I'm going to go ahead and whip finish here. And I always tie my antennae in first when I'm tying a beadhead, especially. And I usually am tying these girdle bugs with beadheads nowadays. On smaller ones, I'll just use the bead as weight. Bigger ones like this, I'll use a brass bead rather than tungsten. And one reason I like the brass rather than tungsten a lot of the time is I don't want that super aggressive diving action. And particularly this time of year when the fish are going to be not quite as chasey because they're cold. The water is still in the low 40s. I want kind of a gentle sink rate. I mean, I want it to sink, but I don't want it to lunge head first to the bottom like it's a bait fish. These things are I want this fly to drift. You see the orientation of the fly here. I want it to drift horizontally. And so if I go with a tungsten bead, it's going to simply sink too fast by the head. Now my body on this fly, or my underbody I should say, is going to be non-toxic wire. And I finally figured out, thanks to some other YouTube videos, what this stuff is. And you can buy it in fly shops in little spools, or you can go on Amazon and buy lead-free soldering wire. And that's what this is. And I'm tying it with this rather than lead because I do use these quite a bit in Yellowstone Park in the fall. And then actually I need to get up there because Gardner River is open right now, and I'm willing to bet these will work on the Gardner just as they do on the Yellowstone. See, on the Yellowstone right now, the main fish that we're targeting are actually pre-spawn rainbow trout, and they're going to be sitting kind of in their wintering pools, which are going to be big walking speed eddies, particularly below creek mouths because they do run up the creeks to spawn, but pretty much any big walking speed eddy is going to be full of trout right now, and they are getting a little hungrier than they were, a few weeks ago in the heart of winter. And so you go up there for a few hours in the early afternoon, and they will be eating bigger stuff, either stonefly nymphs like this or eggs. Occasionally streamers, especially as we get further into spring. But stonefly nymphs typically are kind of the best combination of big mouthful without a lot of work, because obviously with a baitfish imitation, they've got to chase it. But I'm going to go ahead and restart my thread then behind that wire. And I never measure the number of turns of wire. I typically like it essentially between my hook point here and the bead. And then, sort of jam it up underneath the bead. And then build a thread dam behind it to hold it in place. And then to keep it from twisting, I'm going to go ahead and then wrap over it. Essentially trying to get a wrap or two into most of those segments between the segments of the wire. All right, and then stop at the back here, and then repeat the same process that I did on the front of the fly. And what I've got here actually is my strand of lead wire or of spandex legs here. Now, when you buy these, they are typically knotted in the middle like that. I always go ahead and just throw some thread around at the end, and that way there's less waste. If they're tied in the middle, you have waste, on both sides of that middle section, and then here we only have that little bit of waste. And I always pre-cut my body legs to the same length because I know that I want those all to be the same length. The antennae and tails are a little different because they tend to be a little bit longer, particularly for the tails, than the body legs, and so they don't. I do have to cut these kind of individually, or at least cut them separately. And in general, you're going to see here, I do like long legs on this fly. I mean, I like long legs generally, but specifically on this fly, I do like them pretty long because I can always cut those shorter, and obviously the longer length you're going to get more movement. All right, now my body material on this fly, and I'm going to show you my my skein of chenille here. This is Henry's Lake Chenille by Cascade Crest Tools, and here is my chenille skein. This is just a piece of cardboard that I've cut to approximate a card that you'd find chenille on. But that tells you how much I like this color for this fly. This is basically the only fly I tie with this chenille, but it was still worth buying this giant thing of it. Now I will say they've changed the dye lot, or at least on that color on that giant block they had changed the dye lot. I got some size 3 here, which this would be more suitable for a size 2 or 4 fly, or if I did ever want to tie a woolly bugger. But if you compare the stuff in the plastic here is a little bit paler, and the sparkles aren't quite as bright, I don't think. I do actually kind of like this better, but I think it probably works the same. Alright, but anyhow, if I was tying this without an underbody, I would actually tie the chenille in all the way up to the bead and use that to create an underbody, but since I used the lead-free wire for that, don't need to do that. So what we're going to do instead is just strip off the tip there and then tie that in behind my lead, or not lead-free I should say. And then I'm going to go ahead and wrap forward, and I like to kind of concentrate my legs really in the kind of the forward 2/3 of the hook shank. And you'll see a lot of the videos where people tie in their legs all in one bunch and then use the chenille to separate them. And I don't like doing that, even though it takes longer. What I like to do is tie them in individually, using X-wraps here. And then I sort of establish the orientation I want in those legs with my thread. You see how that first leg, I'm tying that in so it's kind of canted backwards. And I try to get the length, more or less right out of the gate. That way, again, there's less waste and I don't have to trim them later. And then the middle leg here, I'm going to do the same thing, X-wraps, but I'm just going to kind of make the X-wraps, average them out so that the legs are kind of perpendicular to the hook shank there. And you do tend to push the legs, certain directions based on what your thread is doing. You tend to push them the direction your thread is being wrapped. So in other words, if I'm wrapping like this and kind of angling the thread forward, I tend to push the legs forward. And so like this last leg I'm going to tie in, I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to start from the back because I want to push that forward a little bit. That one's a lot shorter. I must not have cut these right. I would normally want this front leg to be the same length as the ones in back, but I apparently cut them a little crooked. But I mean, the fish are going to care a lot less than I do, and I do have those 2 long ones, and so that's okay. But again, same deal. Kind of let those angle those front ones a little bit forward. And then I'll finish my thread in front there. And I probably should have tied those front legs in slightly further back. In other words, I should have tied the middle one further back and then made up the difference with the ones in front. But again, they don't have to be perfect. And then what I always do here is apply some head cement to those thread wraps, securing the legs in place. And I'm using head cement here because super glue will melt those legs. When I tied in the antennae here, I put the super glue well back from the actual legs themselves. If I put the super glue on just these little thread wraps securing the body legs there, it would melt those and make those things crispy and fall off. All right, but I'm going to drop my bobbin cradle here and then just wrap my chenille forward. And again, I kind of, instead of using just the chenille to separate out the legs, I kind of use chenille and those thread wraps. And so I kind of make, the chenille will kind of fill in. Like I could make another wrap back here, but it's going to push those legs forward. But if I go ahead of those legs, the fibers on that chenille is still going to kind of cover up the hook there, even though it was kind of an uneven thread wrap or uneven body wrap. And then get up to the front here, and then that last half turn in front. And like I did crowd the eye. In fact, I'm going to just back that off. I'm just going to tie that in. You see how I kind of backed that off so I didn't press those legs back. I'm going to do that, you know, that quarter turn less of chenille I made it so those legs are still canted, you know, more or less straight out or forward rather than backward. I really don't want them canted backward. And I'm just whip finishing here, and on this, because it's a big fly, I'm going to make 2 really big whip finishes, and that way there's plenty of room there for me to kind of find, you know, you can kind of see on the top of the fly here how the thread sort of disappeared. On the bottom of the fly there, it's sort of visible, and so that's actually where I'm going to put my super glue, which I use for head cement, usually at the front of flies. And there you have it. That's a Henry's Lake Girdle Bug, patch Rubberlegs, etc. And this one, I guarantee you take this out and you fish either a kind of a generic attractor nymph like a beadhead and copper, or a big pheasant tail, something like that, relatively large, like a 14, or an egg behind this. You take this and you fish it in those walking speed runs on the Yellowstone River, and I guarantee you're going to catch some fish on it. Certainly my number 1 fly this time of year is this, at least my number 1 big fly. And from here on out, you know, through the spring, I should be able to tie flies I'm actually kind of using in the time frame, because we're going to be transitioning away from midges into the more, you know, fun, exciting stuff like this. But as always, well, let me just kind of sum up here. Just gussy up your girdle bugs a little bit. You know, use some checked legs, throw a bead on there, use this little bit more glittery chenille, you know, mix up your chenille colors, tie them on some different hooks, you know, different sink rates. And, you know, if you're fishing a place that people use a lot of these kind of patterns, I think that'll make a difference for you. But as always, thanks for watching, and if you find this video helpful, feel free to click the Buy Me a Coffee link in the pattern description. And if you're looking for a guide trip this season or know someone who is, feel free to get in touch, flyfishmontana.biz. I will see you next week.